Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jim Morris. I most recently worked as the superintendent of the Fremont Unified School District, and it really is a pleasure. I read the bios of this very distinguished group, and it is a pleasure for me to be here with you this morning, talk a little bit about my experience and what I learned throughout my career as a school administrator and superintendent. I'm going to really try to share in about 20 minutes and allow some time for questions and answers everything that I know about school construction and managing capital programs. And that is kind of a mighty task, but I'm going to try to summarize it. And first of all, I began with this slide because this slide really shows why we're doing it, why we're doing construction. I had some great mentors throughout my career who really taught me as a school superintendent, it's about instruction. It's about doing a good job in providing students with the facilities that they deserve. And that's why we do construction and modernization. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the context that I came from so it'll help you to understand my comments. Fremont is depends on your context. I spent first 30 years of my career working for the Los Angeles Unified School District. And so when I went to Fremont with 42 schools and 35,000 students, I kept telling them this is a small school district. You know, in LA we had 900 schools, 42 schools, this is a small school district. And they kept telling me, no, it's a big school district. But a little bit about where I came from in Fremont, we had very high-performing schools. Every award that schools could receive, high level of expectations from the community. Had a 5-member elected school board. We had 3,600 employees. And when I first went to Fremont in 2010, we were the largest employer. Very proud to say Tesla now has more employees in Fremont than the school district does. The other good thing that really made my job as a superintendent in leading a capital facilities program successful was I worked for a wonderful school board. And when I went there, I said to the school board, give me 4 or 5 jobs to do. I can't do more than that. What are your priorities? What has to be done to improve education in this town? And they really told me, here's the 4 things we need you to do. Number 1, improve relations with employee groups. There was some tension with employee unions. Second thing they said is we have to really do a do-over and recalibrate our relationship with the city of Fremont. There was a lot of tension between the mayor and the city council and school district elected officials. Second thing is we have to pass a parcel tax, which is a local tax to support schools that they have in California. And finally, pass a school bond. And that we did in 2014. We passed a $650 million capital program for the school district. Fremont was a large growing school district. When I went there in 2010, we had 31,000 students. Today they have 35,000 students, and we're projected by 2022-23 to have about 40 or 41,000 students. So it's an area that's growing. And so not only were we doing modernization projects, we were also doing a lot of new construction. So that was kind of the context. And how did we do it? That's really the meat, the next few slides of what I want to share with you. How did we do it? When I went there, I knew as a superintendent or a leader that we had to really move from sitting around. I am not a guy who has a lot of patience for meetings. If I have a meeting, I have about 30 minutes, and that's as much as I can stand. And I noticed this pattern in the school district of they spent a lot of time talking about goals. And we really tried to move from goals to doing stuff, having clear expectations about what needed to be done. And that's kind of the next big idea is this knowing when to stop planning and start doing. And that's what we had to do in Fremont. I knew that the board had, here's 4 things we want you to do. Here's what we expect you to accomplish. That was a great gift that they gave to me. I think all of us in our jobs, if somebody said, here's 4 things, do it. and let you be free to do it. It's a great way to achieve some important goals. Second, we had to really maintain focus in a very noisy environment. I think probably from looking at your jobs and the things that you do, you probably face that a lot on a daily basis, right? You have important things that need to happen, but suddenly some teacher at one of the schools does something naughty, and you got 6 news cameras out in front of that school, and that becomes the noise that's the focus. And what are you saying? No, I got to get these schools modernized. Really maintaining focus on what you do despite all this other noise. Test scores come out. That's a bunch of atmospheric noise that happens. Everybody's focused on that. No, you really have to say, what are the important things we're working on? Second, another thing that we did is really as a manager, I had to learn to trust the people that worked for me and really balance flexibility and accountability. I had an incredible administrative assistant in Fremont. Her name was Sharon, and she used to tease me sometimes, and she'd say, you know what, I'm going to have emblazoned on the wall in the office, somebody come and put beautiful calligraphy on the wall in the office, Superintendent's office motto: there's no issue too small for us to micromanage. Now, she was teasing me when she said that, but I knew as a superintendent that sometimes I had to really understand the details of it. I had to really understand what's the difference between modular construction and stick-built construction. And I had to really spend the time to know before I was bringing those issues to the board. I had to be smart about the work. And finally, I think the last big thing that we did was really created this environment where we tried to manage goal overload. I think I've said all along, you know, you can only be doing a good job working on a small number of goals at a time. So here's kind of the lessons learned, the big things that I learned about implementing and managing our bond program. Be mindful that you're spending the taxpayers' money and that schools belong to the community. There's a lot of pressure when you're managing a large capital program to do lots of stuff. And I cannot tell you how many times I said to people in Fremont, hey, I'm the guy who went out and did all those community meetings and met with taxpayers and went knocking on doors, and I told them what we're going to do. It's their money. We really had to be respectful that we were spending taxpayer dollars. It was some tough lessons we had to learn, but those schools belong to the community. They're not my schools. I was, last year, about in October, I was visiting one of our schools, and I'm walking across the playground of Matos Elementary, and this little, probably about 3rd grade cherub comes running across the playground and says, I know who you are. I know who you are. Now, I'm like excited, right? This kid knows the superintendent. That's pretty impressive. He says, you're the landlord. Well, I really took that to heart and said, you know what, that's a pretty cool thing, because he knows this school doesn't belong to me. I'm just kind of helping to make it a better place. But that idea that the schools really belong to the community should be a driving part of what we do. And finally, a second one is own program integrity. Accept it as your personal integrity. In many of our school districts, every article you read in the newspaper about a facilities program gone wrong is about somebody who didn't have the integrity to manage the public's dollars well. And I just can't stress, one of the things that we did in Fremont that was very successful was I had a school board who had incredible expertise. They were highly educated, intelligent folks that I had a great deal of respect for. And so we really worked hard to really have integrity about every penny. We'd go back to those community meetings. We'd go back to the information we put out to the community. Here's what we're going to accomplish. And we held ourselves accountable for making sure that we kept the promises that we made to the voters. And it became really my personal integrity. And I think in whatever role you have in supporting it, it has to be, this is what we promised. This is the public's money. Keep promises made to the public, and sometimes it hurts. We learned that lesson so many times with cost escalation and unforeseen conditions and all those things that can go wrong. We have to keep our promises we made to the public. School by school, here's what we said we would get done. And guess what? A lot of times we had, for example, in Fremont, suddenly in the bond program, we said we were going to do this repair to the swimming pool. Suddenly, there's 200 folks lined up at the school board meeting. No, we need a new swimming pool. Sorry, we can't do that, folks. That isn't the promise that we made. If we do that, because you're pressuring us now, we're not going to be able to do something else we promised another community. And so sometimes it hurt. We had to have school board members who were tough, who were able to withstand some pressure, but in order to do the right thing. I think of our experience in Los Angeles with having to do eminent domain and take folks' property away. That is a hard thing you have to do. We had to do in Fremont an eminent domain hearing, much smaller, much tighter community, where you're taking somebody's property away from them involuntarily in order to build a school building or expand a school site or build a school. Not easy to do. Sometimes it hurts to do those tough things, and it's hard for elected officials. I think we all have interaction with school board members. School board members do a really, really tough job. Next thing I think that we really learned in Fremont was as a superintendent, respect your role and the role of the board. Funny folks ask me sometimes, how did you do such a good job of managing the school board? Because they tend to want to micromanage and get into the details just like you do. Well, it was because they saw leadership there. And we really had to work with the board and teach them, here's what you do and here's what the staff does. And kind of be very clear and constantly remind them, here's my job and here's your job. I add this notion to that idea about it's actually the secret of a successful marriage. I've been married for 40 years, and my wife constantly tells me this is her favorite line, change is good, honey, you go first. And the school board told me that sometimes, and I tried to push back at them to say it has to be a negotiation, right? This is what you do, and this is what we do. And I think sometimes we see school boards that really want to get into the details and get involved with projects in a way that they shouldn't. And strong leadership, if they see strong leadership from the superintendent and staff, it really helps to curtail that behavior. In California, we have for school bonds a school bond oversight committee, and that was really, really effective. A group of community members who come forward, and they really want to be the ears and the eyes of the community to make sure that you're spending the school bond money correctly. Having an effective bond oversight committee was incredibly powerful tool for us, both in my experience in Los Angeles and in Fremont. Having people that the community had faith in, knowing they're looking at those expenditures, they're looking at the bond language, they're making sure that you're keeping your promises. Finally, hire the right people, trust them to do their job, and ask a lot of questions. Hiring the right people as a school superintendent was probably one of the biggest challenges that I faced. And when you get folks in there doing construction management or construction oversight, or your facility folks in-house in the school district, who know what they're doing, you really have to listen to them and you really have to trust them. We had a great experience in Fremont simply because we had really, really competent folks advising us and then internally hiring good people and relying on their expertise. This is the kind of the lessons that I've learned throughout my career that really prepared me to lead facility program at a school district level. Develop a compelling driving vision. You know, when I think about school principals that I hired who were successful or not successful, facilities folks that I hired who were successful or not successful, I think there are a couple of things that make people successful in their job. Number one, when I hired a principal and they were having problems, it was always because they didn't have a vision or couldn't communicate their vision. Second problem that I saw oftentimes was the relationships, the people part of it, getting along with folks. So I've learned throughout my career, you have to have a compelling driving vision. Second, use the right data for accountability. You know, we talk a lot, and school boards and school folks always want to talk about using data. You have to make sure that you're using the right data. Encourage a demanding culture. I think one of the things that was most profound for me when I became the superintendent in Fremont was how demanding the community was. We had in California at that time a system for scoring schools, and I had some of the highest performing schools in the state. But the community members would say, it's not good enough. They need to do better. And so that demanding culture, I think, is really, really effective in helping a system move forward. As a school superintendent or a school leader, pay attention to what you pay attention to. Suddenly I would find if I was very interested in something, suddenly it became important to a lot of folks in the school district. If you're the facilities director or you work with facilities in a school district, knowing what's important to you and what you pay attention to suddenly sends a powerful and strong message to your staff. It was interesting, you know, I would talk a little bit about this issue we had with a swimming pool in Fremont. So I decided, okay, we had, you know, 6 high schools, and I'm going to go out and personally inspect every one of those pools. I got to see them in order to lead this decision about swimming pools. Suddenly, I had school board members and principals, everybody wanted to go and see everybody else's swimming pool. And so I just remember as a leader, the power of your leadership and what you pay attention to becomes important. Finally, fight the right battles and move on. This is a career lesson I learned. We had in Los Angeles, I worked for several years as chief of staff when Governor Romer was our superintendent. And Roy Romer had been 3-term governor in Colorado, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and came to Los Angeles as our superintendent. And I worked as his chief of staff, and that man taught me so much about integrity, but also fighting the right battles and move on, let it go afterwards. It was an important career lesson that I learned. When it's over and the board votes, move on. We're on to the next issue, and it doesn't really matter how the vote comes out. It matters that you gave your expertise, you had a strong opinion, and you fought the right battle. Next thing I learned throughout my career is just recognizing the unique gifts and talents of staff. We just have to appreciate, and as a leader in a school district, folks knowing that you care about them personally, that you respect their work is the best motivation that you possibly can give to your staff. And finally, celebrate successes. You know, there are so many times in our career when this work is hard. What you're doing is hard. Working with folks to improve and build school facilities, it's hard work. And you have to take the time to celebrate the successes that you've had along the way. I was to allow about 20 minutes for questions and responses. I would be happy to respond to questions that you might have. Oh, yeah. We
Jim,
had,
is there any way you could repeat the question for the
oh,
crowd?
yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. So the question was, we did a lot of work with developers in Fremont. As I mentioned in the beginning, Fremont was a growing school district with a large number of new housing units and a pretty robust, vibrant community. And we had some battles with developers because of new housing units going in, but we didn't have the facilities. And there's kind of a strange way of funding capital facilities in California. So we had kind of taken on this fight to get some changes made at the state level to help improve our position. But along the way, we had some battles with developers. And one developer in particular, was just not going to do anything to help us. They were building 500 homes, but they were just not willing to help us build school facilities. And you know, when you're building in a community 4 and 5 bedroom homes that are selling for $1.6 and $1.7 million, you know you're going to generate a lot of students from those homes. And so we took this on as a battle. And I mean, we went so far as I took busloads of parents and teachers and community members to Sacramento to the state allocation board, and we organized. The most effective thing actually we did was we did picketing in front of the sales office one weekend. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting, the school board in Fremont would tease me because they said, happiest look that they've ever seen on my face is this photo on the front page of the local newspaper with me holding this picket sign above my head that says, the superintendent's naughty list, and the name of the developer below it. But we also found great success in working with developers. As a matter of fact, I'm very happy to say that in South Fremont, Toll Brothers, Lennar, and Valley Oaks Partners, they are on the superintendent's happy list because we came up with a very effective deal for a developer-built school in South Fremont near the new BART station that they're building. So it was, number one, fighting the battle when we needed to fight the battle, and then finding effective ways. We were instrumental, one of the first school districts that charged a level 3 developer fee simply because we needed it. We had a desperate need for additional classroom seats. So it was making friends when we could make friends, and fighting a battle when we needed to was, I think, the effective tool that we used. Yes, sir.
Jim, in your time as an administrator, how much time were you spending on facility-related issues early on compared to your most recent experience? Percentage-wise of your time?
I would say the really good thing is it wasn't a huge percentage of my time. Why? Because I had really competent folks that worked for me. I mean, I had folks that I trusted to do a good job. They knew when I found as superintendent, maybe if you want to give me a percentage, I'd say maybe 10%. But it was really because I trusted the people who worked for me, and they were really smart about knowing we're never going to let the guy be surprised. Something's coming up, something's on the radar, we're going to give him what he needs to get smart about that issue. I found in Fremont and in Los Angeles, when the superintendent and the facilities team are on the same page, really clear about what needs to happen, it makes it very, very easy for the elected officials. I wouldn't want to be a school board member. Those folks are in a tough position. They have to make tough decisions, and I would say to them all the time, I get to make a recommendation. You're the one who has to cast the vote. You have the tough job to do, and really respecting their role. And so I found that when the facilities team kept me knowledgeable and aware and briefed and said, here's one you got to go into a great detail. You really have to understand this one. I trusted that I needed to get smart about it. Yes?
Fremont was one of the first districts in the Bay Area to build the Designbuild model of K12. Can you talk a little bit about how that helped roll out your bond, or the pros and cons of that method?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
If we could
the
just
funny
repeat
thing
the
was,
question for
the
the crowd.
question was, Fremont was one of the first districts in the Bay Area to go design build. And talk a little bit about how that helped to keep your bond promises and really move your bond program along. I was a little bit leery at first. I was a little bit leery, and I called my friend Guy Mahula and said, okay, Guy, teach me, get somebody to come in and spend some time to teach me about this. And actually they did. They helped me get knowledgeable. It was very effective for us because of the time savings and being able to get classrooms ready for kids. You know, we had just such a huge number of portable classrooms in Fremont, and as I say, it was an incredibly good, powerful school district academically, but there were a lot of things in the school district that needed to be improved, and that was, you know, facilities more than anything. I just remember being so taken aback when I first became the superintendent there by a couple of things. Number one, how every school was built in the 50s and had pretty much been left untouched since the 50s. They were in good shape. The custodians and the facility staff did a great job of kind of holding them together, but nothing really had been done in that amount of time. And because of the increasing enrollment, we not only had this huge modernization need, but we also had the need to get new classrooms up and get new classrooms up quickly. We were really running out of options when you really looked at, you know, putting 20 portable classrooms down across a district every year, using every available classroom. We had in Fremont, they did this strange thing, and they're still doing it, called overloads. And I used to call it overdosed. They would say, if you buy a house in this particular neighborhood, and you're supposed to go to your neighborhood school, and you have a child who's in second grade, but there's no room in the second grade, we're gonna overload you to another school where there's space available. And then you go on a waiting list. I guess this is common in some school districts. You go on a waiting list and you get to go back to the neighborhood school. Well, folks would be saying, you know, I spent this much money to buy a house to get my kids in this school, and now we're being overloaded across town. We'd send kids wherever there was space. We had about 2,600 students across the district who were overloaded because we just didn't have seats available. And so we literally used every seat in that school district. There was a desperate, desperate need. The worst part of it was when they're doing this overloading, guess what? If I have 500 seats at a school, and I have 600 students who live in that attendance area, who am I going to overload? What's the most unconscionable way you could solve that problem in the world? You overload the kindergartners, right? I turn off the tap. So that's what we're doing in Fremont. We're sending 2,000 kindergartners across town because we don't have enough room. It was a compelling story that helped us convince the community to pass a bond. Because that's can you imagine the world through the eyes of a 5-year-old? The first message they get, we don't want you. That's what we're telling them at your neighborhood school. Then we send them across town to another school. The mother comes in, of course, and wants to fuss at me and says, you know, you want me to drive my child 7 miles across town. You're not providing transportation for a piddly half-day kindergarten program? Well, yes, ma'am, that's what I'd like you to do. And I'd say it with a smile, but that's the situation we were in. And so it helped, really the reality of what we were facing helped us to convince the community we really need to not only fix the schools, but also build some new classroom seats in neighborhoods where they're needed.
Do you have any personal thoughts about the value proposition that resulted in using Designbuild versus traditional Designbuild, which you probably had most of your career?
No, I'm not expert on it.
I just want your gut. I'm the expert.
Okay, so my gut is it was pretty effective for us. It was pretty effective for us because of the time savings, because it saved a lot of that communication and miscommunication between folks about what needed to be done in building the school, and it helped us get schools and classrooms built more quickly. That's what we were after. I mean, that's what our need was, fast, getting rooms done quickly.
Yeah, I was just trying to solve for Project Frog.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had a heck of a lot of frog buildings in Fremont that you know, I had to, as I say, I was the first person who had to become convinced that this was a good product, and you know, we found it very successful for us.
Any more questions? Alrighty, thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you.